3 chapters today, and that would be Fight and Flight, The Department of Mysteries, and Beyond the Veil. And these are sort of getting brought together because they are really the big first chunk of our climax for this book, and that is the decision to just frickin' go for it. Yet it is not always the actions that we should be paying attention to. The actions are going to carry us along. From getting away from Umbridge, to getting away from the Centaurs, to getting away from Hogwarts to London, to getting into the Department of Mysteries, to literally getting into where we need to be, and then all the fights that take place after that point. There is a lot of action, but what we need to be careful is not to just read the action and just treat it as a set of action chapters. There's actually a key word that I've put in the title that I've picked up a lot here, and it's not always because somebody is saying it, but it's haunting this entire set of chapters to almost the extreme, and that is worth. And the reason why it's haunting this set of chapters is because we're actually seeing the question of what is worth more or less, or what we're exchanging for it. And I'm not talking just about the life of Sirius Black, but we will get to that. So let's, like our time turners and our baby-headed Death Eater, and rewind back to where we left our heroes, and that was with Hermione and Harry leading Dolores Umbridge off into the Forbidden Forest. Is this action worth it? Surface value? Probably yes, because we do need to get away from her. But again, we need to look at some of the deeper meanings behind the actions we're actually taking. And the first big discussion of worth we actually get is this argument between, very directly between Umbridge and the Centaurs, but oddly enough between Umbridge and the Ministry, the Centaurs, the rest of humanity, and Grump comes into it. And that is the order of being and their worth. Umbridge, of course, doesn't like half-breeds, and she's certainly calling the Centaurs half-breeds, because they appear to us to be half-man, half-horse. That is how we would describe them. They, of course, would see themselves as a completely separate being. And they were invited to join the being section, and at this point in time, canon-wise, have refused to be recognized as beings by the Ministry, because that would be admitting to the Ministry and their decisions. They also took offense at some of the other creatures that they would have had to be classed as beings alongside. So to the Ministry, they're classified as beasts. But in the argument that we actually see, we do see the Centaurs at first saying, like, no, we're not lesser than you. And then we actually see them turn around and say, we're more than you. Particularly when Hermione and Harry are simply trying to explain that they came for help. And the Centaurs, of course, are taking it all wrong and edging on violence in regards to, well, this one's near manhood, send them with the woman, like, But then we also get, when Gromp comes in, the Centaurs are really degrading of him. And they're just like, go away. But in a fight, Gromp seems to be the one that's winning. So the Centaurs, of course, are looking at their intelligence. They say that they have Umbridge, in classifying them, is saying near human intelligence. They, of course, are saying that they have better intelligence than the humans. But then there's the other side of things, where Gromp is simply the biggest, so he's gonna win in that fight. And why do we have these classifications at all? Why are we very directly being faced with the idea that one race has to be inherently better than the other? Probably because that is exactly what our own communities, particularly here in America and North America, are going through right now, with the question of the Black Lives Matter movement. If we're constantly having, in the past, degraded one area of humanity, then saying, oh yeah, everything is fine, is not going to work out. And that becomes the issue then, because of course everyone's saying, well, with this movement, they're saying that they're better. Same with something like feminism, where a lot of people are looking at it saying, well, it's saying that women are better than men, and not equal to men. And so we actually get this idea that if you're proud of who you are, and that has been degraded in the past, or systematically degraded in the government, like we're seeing the centaurs be degraded, does that automatically mean that you think you're better than the people that you're around, or are you just trying to be equal to them? Because the thing is, it doesn't look like the centaurs are trying to be equal to humanity. They really are just as nose in the air about it as Umbridge is. And Umbridge is saying they're lesser, and the centaurs are saying they're more, and Gromp just wants Hagrid. And it becomes this really terrible question of worth of people, and not just humans in this case, but people, and their lives, and the decisions they make. And that's why you have to be really careful not to get carried away with the action so far, is because this is a serious question that we need to consider. And it's only actually really sort of face-to-face with you in fight and flight. Because then we go on to all our other questions of worth. Until this little one comes popping back up again, with Bellatrix talking about half-bloods, and Harry turning around and saying, he's a half-blood, has he told you that? Mummy's a witch, Dad's a muggle, or is he even claiming he's pure blood? Like, it pops back up again. But within our one race. Within humanity, we suddenly have this question of who is worth more. Which is then complicated by the whole questions of beings and who is worth more. And it doesn't have an answer because we have extremists on both sides. It's really hard to find a middle ground that's really going to work with everybody. Especially when the extremists just start trying to kill everybody. Like, Bellatrix is really like, I wanna so bad. Literally, the orb is the only thing that is keeping Harry and his friends alive initially. But then we have questions of moments like riding the Thestrals, and is it worth trusting in something that you cannot see? We have the moment where they're in the phone box going into the Ministry for Magic, and the question of, is it worth telling the truth? The entire question of, is it worth going to London in the first place? Is it worth going through all these difficulties to try and achieve something? Initially, we start seeing, yes, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione trusting that the Thestrals are there is worth it. It gets them to where they need to go. telling the truth at the ministry seems to be worth it because it gets them into the ministry, and they don't get stopped at any point. Was it worth going becomes the difficult question, simply because initially it's a question of, is it worth Sirius Black's life to go? And then of course we find out that Harry's been tricked. And Harry asks himself, was it worth his friends to die for his own stupidity? And the answer to him in that moment, of course, is no. Because he knows now that he's been tricked, and this prophecy is not worth it, and his friends and himself are very close to dying. They are outnumbered by exceptionally more educated wizards and witches. But that question immediately disappears because that is not the question he can dwell on. It goes through his mind, was this worth it? No. And immediately the next question is it worth fighting to try and get out of here? And the immediate answer is yes. And every single one of these kids is like right along with it. Once he's got the idea of smashing the shelves, that becomes worth it. Except again, that's the question. It seems to be that we are literally destroying a big part of the Department of Mysteries. We've let the brains loose because Ron's gone a little loopy. We've smashed all the time turners, and they just keep smashing. They're now stuck in this loop. We've smashed a bunch of these prophecies, and we never get the sense of whether or not this is something that's actually repairable. So is the damage that we're causing, just trying to get out of here, worth the fight that you're putting up? And I think that has to then come the question of, are the lives worth it? Yes, I think any and all lives should be put ahead of the objects around a person. But some people will argue differently. Because again, despite this becoming, is the Smash prophecy worth the life of these 6 students? Actually runs into that discussion of the hierarchy of being that we looked at. If it wasn't the life of Sirius we were concerned for, but someone like Dobby, would that change your decision? Should that affect your decision? Okay, we like Dobby. Would the life of Umbridge be worth the decisions that these students make? Would they make the same decisions if it was Umbridge who had been caught and was being tortured? See, the question gets more complicated, because morally, again, all lives should mean something and should mean the same. So you should be willing to go to the same lengths to save Umbridge as you are to save Sirius. And this has, of course, been a question in philosophy for generations. It is the question that spawned if there was 10 old men and a baby on a track and you could change the way the train was going so it would hit the men or it would hit the baby, who would you choose? It becomes the question of, would you save your mother or 20 strangers? It becomes questions like that. That when it's objects, seem really easy to make that decision. But the question, of course, is how many lives were given to obtain these things, and how many people have spent years of their lives to achieve these things. We have people who have gone through active war zones and have risked their lives and lost their lives to safely store and evacuate pieces of ancient art. We've had librarians and museum curators who have made the decision that these historical pieces are worth more than themselves. So, can we say that, hang the prophecies, these kids need to get out? Well, we're not asking anybody who's worked with the prophecies. We're not asking anybody who understands their worth. Same with the loss of all the time turners. We're suddenly very deep into this question of, are our actions worth it? And there's not going to be an answer because everyone else is going to have their own answers. There are a lot of people who, choosing for themselves, could make that decision. The curators who say, my life, I will give it up so we can get these pieces of art out. But can you point to somebody else and say, you're going to give up your life for these pieces of art? That is a question that not a lot of people are going to be able to ask. Harry is willing to risk his life for even the slightest possibility that his godfather is in trouble. But again, you'll notice that he's trying to get as few people in danger as he can. He's trying to tell Ginny and Luna and Neville not to come. But they make that decision for themselves. They're willing to risk their lives to help with the slightest possibility that Harry's godfather is in trouble. And you see it just keep happening. These kids are watching out for each other. Neville has no wand and a broken nose. He can't even speak properly in this moment. And he's still charging in because Harry can't be alone in this moment. Especially then when we do have the loss of a life. Up to this point in time, it has purely been relative speculation. We haven't actually seen anybody in this set of chapters die. We've seen them really wounded. And we are scared for a lot of these kids, but we haven't seen any direct death right now. And then Sirius gets hit. And I'd like to point out that it does not actually tell us what color of spell hits him. He dodges a red spell. But all Rowling says is he was hit with another flash of light. We don't actually know what color of light hit him, whether it was red or it was green. Or any color in between, I guess. And he falls through the veil. And Harry makes one final choice of what's worth it in this set of chapters, and he tries to go after his godfather. Sirius would probably be really upset at me if I called him an old man. And then Remus has to make the choice that somebody still alive is worth more than one of his best friends who is dead. And it's heartbreaking because these are the decisions that people have to make every day in different lines of work and in war and in peace and in crises and all of these things. They are making a question of worth, and that is a terrifying prospect. But it's not one we can ignore. We can't look at this and say it's all about the action when this set of chapters is actually asking us this philosophical and moral question that people have grappled with for years. And I don't think there's ever going to be an answer that all of us are going to be happy with. I'm not even sure there can be an answer that one of us can be happy with, because it's always going to be a terrifying question to try and answer. And truth be told, I hope none of you have to try and answer that question. But if you ever do, I trust that you'll make the best decision that you can. I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.